Hello, and welcome to the LegalDental.com YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about employment contracts, but specifically about non-compete and non-solicitation clauses. A non-compete is basically time and distance. Post termination from the employment position, how long are you promising to not compete with your former employer? How many years typically? And also, at what distance do you promise to not compete? How far in miles do you promise to not set up an office or otherwise go to work for another employer relative to the location of your prior employment position? So, if you want to break either one of these clauses, the non-compete or the non-solicitation, then it's important to take a look at the contract terms for both of these clauses. And so the phone call that I get the most often is typically not the employer, but rather the employee who still works at a location but is wanting to move on because the position that they have found is within the covenant distance. As far as a distance for non-compete clauses, it really is dependent on the geography, the demographics of an area. In the big city, say like Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, if a office location that you're working at is within a city limits or a highly populated area, typically those non-compete distances are relatively short, averaging around 5 miles at the most. However, in areas further out of town, certainly rural areas or areas that are less populated, non-compete distances can range anywhere from as low as 10 miles to I've seen as great as 30 miles, sometimes more. It all depends on what you negotiate. For non-solicitation is your promise to not solicit former patients of the practice where you have been working. In other words, patients that are what would be considered your patients. You promise not to solicit them after you leave the current position, and you promise to do that for a period of time after termination of that employment agreement. Taking a look at these clauses is very, very important. No two contracts are the same, and I see all different variations of the non-compete and the non-solicitation clauses. With respect to the non-compete, what I'm looking for is language that is reasonable and enforceable. Is the language a non-compete that says that upon breach of the agreement that the former employee, if they are found to be working within the mileage and if it falls within the scope of the period of time that was negotiated for, let's say for the 2 years after termination, if you are technically in breach, but that the liquidated damages is some amount that's outrageous, like $300,000 when your compensation was only $100,000 to $150,000 the year before, that type of non-compete would probably be found to be not reasonable. On the other hand, I typically see non-competes that the penalty for breaching the agreement is either the full amount of what was earned in the year prior, or some percentage thereon, or it could be that the employer is able to show that in the agreement you agreed to a specific stipulated amount of liquidated damages. This amount usually ranges between $50,000 to $100,000, give or take. It just depends on what you negotiate. And that leads me to the second point of what I look for the enforceability of a non-compete clause, and that is whether or not the agreement included liquidated damages. Was there an amount that was specified that the parties agreed to, that if there was a breach of the non-compete, the former employee would have to pay because they promised to pay this amount in lieu of keeping the promise of the non-compete covenant. It all comes down to how well did you negotiate the non-compete and non-solicitation clauses in your agreement in the first place. There's an opportunity in the beginning to negotiate the terms. Typically, what I see in really tough non-competes is that the employee who's wanting to move on didn't take the time to really negotiate or have that employment agreement reviewed or seek the assistance of legal help when getting into that agreement in the first place. There's absolutely an opportunity to square away contingencies, specifically with regard to non-competes and non-solicitation clauses at the beginning when you're first negotiating these employment agreements or associate agreements. So I hope you have found this video to be helpful and educational. I thank you for your support of this LegalDental.com YouTube channel. Please click subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and feel free to leave a comment below. Look for additional videos in the near future. Thank you again.